Hello, you're watching Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel on the 11th of August 2011. In today's programme, we look at a recent Employment Appeal Tribunal decision, which is a helpful reminder about suitable alternative roles in a redundancy situation. We'll also look at ACAS's recent advice for employers and employees affected by the recent riots in many of the major cities across the UK. And finally, we'll touch on an employment appeal decision confirming that an employee on long-term sick leave is entitled to receive holiday pay on termination, even if they fail to request holiday. A useful case this week if you're in the process of or are planning to carry out a redundancy exercise in the near future. The decision in Stoke-on-Trent reminds us of the principles to take into account when considering whether, in a redundancy situation, an alternative job offer is suitable, and whether an employee's decision to refuse the offer is reasonable. In this case, Mrs. Bird was made redundant following a restructuring within her organisation. Her employer refused to pay her a redundancy payment as, in their view, she'd unreasonably refused the offers of suitable alternative jobs. Ed Gregory recaps on the law and what this case means for employers.
During a redundancy exercise, if an employee is redundant and they refuse suitable alternative work offered to them, if their refusal is unreasonable, then they lose their right to a redundancy payment. However, if the role or roles offered are not suitable alternatives, then this can undermine the fairness of the redundancy consultation process and lead to a finding that the redundancy dismissal was unfair. In this case, the Employment Appeal Tribunal reviewed the law and confirmed that the questions to be asked in each case, when determining whether a job offer is a suitable alternative, are firstly, whether the offers of employment are suitable for that particular employee, and secondly, whether the employee's refusal of the offer or offers was reasonable. So the test is both objective and subjective, and the two questions should be considered separately, but they're not completely unrelated. For example, the more suitable the offer, the easier it may be for the employer to show that the employee's refusal of the offer was unreasonable. So when looking at suitability, you need to look at the suitability of the job for that particular employee. The whole of the job should be considered, not only the tasks to be performed and the levels of responsibility, but also the specific terms of employment such as wages, hours and location. In addition, the onus is on the employer to show that the job offer is suitable for that particular employee. For example, does it suit his particular skills, aptitudes and experience? And does the employee have sound and justifiable reasons for turning down the offer? So, employers should be prepared to explain why this is the case, and the best way of doing this, as ever, is by having supporting documentation at the time of the redundancy about why the role was suitable for that particular employee. And this can be in the form of emails and notes of meetings, for example.
Thanks, Ed. Moving on now, the recent riots have caused significant damage to homes and businesses in many of the major cities across the UK. Retail businesses have borne the brunt of the vandalism and looting, causing many to close. With many retailers already struggling for survival, the recent troubles couldn't be more ill-timed. ACAS, the Advisory Conciliation and Arbitration Service, has this week issued advice for employers and employees who've been affected by the riots, and you can access this advice by clicking on the link below the screen. It highlights the importance of maintaining an open and clear dialogue during this difficult time, and to be flexible in terms of working hours and location. It also urges employers to be fair and consistent with how they deal with their employees. Employees who do not report for work, even where this may be due to travel disruption caused by riots, have no legal entitlement to be paid unless their contracts provide differently or they decide to take unauthorised paid leave. Nonetheless, given the extreme circumstances, some employers may be willing to make an exception and provide paid time off in cases of genuine absence. Home working may be an option for some stranded employees, but not others, and certainly won't provide a workable solution for many of the retail businesses out there. In more extreme cases, it may be necessary to close entire retail stores. Where retailers are forced to take this option, they'll be obliged to continue to pay their staff as normal. For many retailers, this will therefore be an option of last resort. Other options would be to agree that employees take time off as holiday, thereby reducing the retailer's holiday pay liability, or relocating them on a temporary basis, and the latter option needing the employee's agreement in the absence of an express term in the contract of employment. Unusual or extreme situations like this are never easy for employers to manage, and pragmatism is absolutely essential to maintain staff morale. The ACAS advice certainly provides a helpful steer for employers and employees to follow and should be recommended reading for any employer affected by the disturbances. The latest case in the often somewhat confusing field of holiday entitlement and pay for employees on long-term sick leave is the case of NHS Leeds and Lana. The Employment Appeal Tribunal in this case recently held that Mrs Lana, who was absent for more than a year and hadn't requested to take any holidays during that time, was entitled to be paid for her unused holidays when she left the trust. This case doesn't add anything particularly new, and it's a shame that the Appeal Tribunal didn't take the opportunity to clarify some of the trickier issues around holiday entitlement and pay for employees on long-term sick. Nevertheless, it's helpful insofar as it confirms that where an employee fails to submit a request for holiday before the end of the leave year, as they've been absent on sick leave for that year, their holiday entitlement and their right to be paid for any accrued but untaken holidays will still automatically carry over to the following year. But the right to be paid for the holidays will only crystallise on termination of employment. We suspect that there'll be more case law on this issue in due course, and we'll keep you updated of any developments, particularly in respect of the Advocate General's recent opinion on holidays and sickness absence that we commented on in our news programme on the 14th of July. Here, the Advocate General ruled that it was appropriate to limit the time in which accumulated holiday entitlements could be exercised, and an 18-month limit after the end of the relevant leave year would be sufficient. That's probably a fair balance between preserving the right of the individual to take their leave whilst recognising the management and financial impact for business if an employee is entitled to accrue unlimited leave. But again, we'll keep you updated as to whether the ECJ adopts this approach. So that's all for today from Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel. Thank you for watching and goodbye.